Hi, I wanted to do a show about the prophet Elijah, whose story is told in the Old Testament. He's one of my favourite characters from the Bible. I actually wrote a book about Elijah many years ago, which is still available, paperback and ebook. Anyway, I'm going to discuss Elijah for this film from the point of view of Rudolf Steiner. Now, the name Elijah means divine bearer of forces. But I find it intriguing that Elijah is a mishmash of Elohim, gods, and Jah from Yahweh or Jehovah at the end. Perhaps this is depicting the change from the Elohim to Jehovah in the Bible, Elijah. Now Elijah walks the land and is revered by the people for the miracles he took part in and the wise words he gave. But what is strange about Elijah is that he had a bright light around him. Nobody could see his face because of the brightness. Elijah was the light, a bright light. There was a radiance about him, so people did not recognize him. He could not be seen as a human figure. Now this was because Elijah was in contact with the divine source, with God. He was God's chosen servant. Though he is described later as a hairy man with a leather belt around his waist, and that's in the second book of Kings, where the main story of Elijah is in the first book of Kings. Now Elijah appears before the king, King Ahab, who is the king of the area, and he tells Ahab that there is a coming drought and famine, and this is because Ahab and his wife Jezebel are not following the word of the Lord God, but instead are following their own gods, Baal. So when the drought and famine eventually comes, Elijah goes to the brook Cherith and is fed by the ravens, and that could be seen in many ways. Birds actually did come and bring him food, or angels came and brought him sustenance, a spiritual sustenance. Elijah goes on to the village, I've forgotten what the village is, and lives with a woman, the widow of Zarephath, and also with her son. Somehow these three always have food throughout the drought and famine. It's said the flour never runs out. But her son unfortunately dies, and Elijah performs a miracle and revives him. Now Steiner says that Elijah survives the drought and famine because he is open to spiritual nourishment, and people saw this when the ravens were feeding him. As the drought continues, Elijah goes for a walk, and he again goes to warn King Ahab about his heretical ways and those of his wife Jezebel. And then comes the confrontation between Baal and God. Elijah and Jezebel decide to have a battle between the two of them. Jezebel rounds up all her prophets of Baal, and Elijah comes forth and goes against them. And it says in the Bible, Elijah says, "How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him." And he's saying this to all the people who don't answer him. They just remain silent, probably transfixed, waiting to see whose God's going to win. Then Elijah says to the people, "I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Therefore let them give us 2 bulls, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other bull, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God." Elijah says to all the people, "Come near to me." So all the people come near to him. And he repairs the altar of the Lord that was broken down. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the Lord had come. I find it quite interesting that it's 12 stones. I'd like to think of it as megalithic stones. Maybe he made a megalithic circle. But obviously it had been destroyed by all those that weren't following the Lord. I don't like to use the word pagans, because I'm a bit of a pagan myself. Anyway, so Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." Then with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood, and said, Fill 4 water pots with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. Then he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. And it came to pass, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Now when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, The Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon, and executed them there. Now, I personally am not too happy that Elijah was a part of this execution of the Baal prophets. And I wonder if there's a deeper meaning to that. But obviously, he was quite concerned by his actions, because after this Elijah goes to the Mount Sinai, the same place that Moses encountered the burning bush. Elijah covers his face and goes into the cave where he encounters the divine, and here he realizes the inner fire. It is written, Then he said, Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rock in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice. So it was, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left. They seek to take my life. Then the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi as king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place. So at Mount Sinai was where Moses encountered the burning bush. Elijah encounters and takes in the divine fire. Moses heard God outside. Elijah hears the divine within himself. And this is what Steiner's saying, that Elijah's come to bring the new way, that God is no longer outside, he's within man and woman, every person. But Elijah has become the flame of God, and we too can become the flame of God. We too have the inner fire. Elijah heard that still small voice inside him, in his soul. He's the first to hear the divine in this way, and this is something that we can all do. But continuing with the story, Elijah is cursed by Jezebel. She vows to kill him. And then the story in the Bible suddenly changes to somebody else, a man called Naboth. Steiner explains the strange tale of Naboth, a story that suddenly interjects into the Elijah narrative. And this is why, according to Steiner. Naboth owned a vineyard next to Ahab and Jezebel's palace in Jezreel, and it is a vineyard that the royal couple coveted. The royal couple have Naboth defamed and then killed him, having him stoned to death, and that way the vineyard becomes theirs. But when Ahab enters the vineyard, he is shocked to see Elijah there. Now Steiner says that Naboth is Elijah. They are the same person. Jezebel has obviously fulfilled her vow of killing Elijah, but only through when he is Naboth. Naboth is an ordinary man, but when he is united with the divine, with God, when he is overpowered by the divine spirit, he transforms into Elijah, he becomes the fire of the divine, the bearer of the Spirit, which is why he walks about radiant in light. Now, after the story of Naboth in the Bible, it now continues with Elijah again. Now, Steiner says that every time Elijah disappears in the narrative, it is because he's returning to the form of Naboth. And Steiner writes that Jezebel, with her witchy talents as the high priestess of Astarte, was able to see that Elijah was Naboth. And Steiner says that she was a clairvoyant and a psychic who had the power to hex. But as we know, Elijah does not die. Naboth dies, but the enlightened Elijah lives on. He is one of the few people to actually ascend, and I'm just going to read how that's written in the Bible. So Elijah's walking with Elisha, the person who's to take over from him. Then it happened, as they continued on and talked, that suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses of fire and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. So he saw him no more, and he took hold of his own clothes and tore them into 2 pieces. He also took up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him, and went back and stood by the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water and said, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he also had struck the water, it was divided this way and that, and Elisha crossed over. Now Elijah still lives, and does come back to earth to help the people with their connection to the divine, as it is written in the Bible, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great day dawns. And that great day that was to dawn was the coming of Christ. Steiner says that Elijah reincarnated many years later as John the Baptist, the herald of the coming Christ. Elijah is a herald of the new epoch, a new cosmic age, the same as John the Baptist was. Elijah's herald was that this was the end of pagan ways and inauguration for a new age where men were able to communicate with the divine through nature, such as seeking the divine in natural forces. It is now the time for the individual to look inside for the divine. Elijah paved the way for the discovery of the divine within oneself, within one's soul. Steiner says that Elijah pointed the way and that it is Elijah who is directing the force that's also mentioned in the Apocalypse of John. Now, there is an old saying that one must always leave a place for Elijah at the table before one eats, because Elijah did not die. He ascended and thus still lives. Elijah always leads one closer to the divine. He is the herald for each new age. And I feel like we're going into a new age now, so maybe Elijah's out there somewhere. Thanks for listening. And please check out my website, debbie-elliott.co.uk. Thank you.